maybe Sharon first and then Male, okay, for each question. So my first question, Sharon, to you is, what is the one thing you're trying to learn these days? What's that one thing?
Thank you, Shraddha, and hello, everyone. One thing that I've been trying to learn lately has been baking. I've been really getting into baking different pastries. I'm still at the basic vanilla sponge level, but I hope to graduate soon. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. Mali, let's hear from you. What's the one thing you're trying to learn?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am trying to learn wheel pottery. I think it's getting there, but still I haven't mastered just like getting things up consistently all the time.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay. My second question, Sharon, one way in which your field of, human-centered design has changed you. Let's hear.
Yeah. Thank you, Shraddha. I think one way it's changed me is a really deep appreciation for how differently people live, work, and think from me. And I think usually we know that people are different from us from different parts of the world, but I think it's exposed me to just understanding how different people live, especially in the context of scarcity, and just appreciating how that shapes so much of our lives. Yeah, I would say that.
Beautiful. That was insightful. Mali, how has this field changed you?
I think my answer is very similar to Sharon. I think this field has taught me that we are not as different from each other as society and like media and everything has led us to think. Of course, we have difference, and designing and thinking about those differences are important, but we're really similar to one another, what we experience, what we go through, what we think, what we need. And it has been in after growing up in a context where like there's a lot us versus them and like different dynamics, it has definitely challenged that notion.
Mm. Wow, that's powerful. I'm hoping that, today our conversations on HCD will help us also, change us in some positive ways as it's changed you. Okay, my next question, Sharon, to you is two most critical skills that a good designer must have, according to you. What are those two skills, in short?
Thank you. As I was, when I think about this, I wonder if they're like hard skills. I think the things that come to mind are usually what feel like softer skills, but are very, very critical to design. And the first thing, which I think in my journey I started with as a designer, I really had to embrace is comfort with ambiguity, and letting that lead your creativity and how you come up with design and solutions. So really just being open to knowing that you don't have the answers, learning from others, and being curious about designing what is suitable for others, most, individually and collectively, and not just your own process. And then secondly is the ability to look for ways in seeing the same thing from different perspectives. Yeah, that's a skill you have to really be open to. Like you can land on a solution, but there's 1,000 different ways.
Wow, okay. All right. That was pretty powerful, Sharon. Let's hear from you, Male. What are the two skills in your mind?
Curiosity, I think a lot of curiosity to discover new things in other places, and then curiosity to try them in new contexts. And I think similar to Sharon, resilience. I remember when I was in undergrad, a teacher used to say, kill your babies. And we're like, what does it mean? And it means just like, don't get too married to your ideas and be resilient enough to know that they might not work and they need to change and continue to try iterate and learning from what their transformation is teaching you as well.
I love that. Kill your babies. Nice. Okay. My last question and one quick one. A few words that define good learning design for you. So we've spoken about what you need to be a good designer, but what is good design really for you, Sharon?
Yes, thank you. it seems like Male and I have many intersections. So I'll say the first word is curiosity, actually. The type of learning that leaves people eager to either repeat what they've just learned or talk about what they've just learned, ask more questions, experiment. So I think curiosity is a definition of good learning design. And then the second word I would choose is storytelling. I think good learning draws from stories, experiences that allow people to tell stories, to listen to stories, to feel inspired by stories as a way to learn. And of course, storytelling is diverse. It could be visual, music, art, and nothing really under the sun is new. So we're never learning something completely new, but just we're always learning how to see from other perspectives and think and learn differently. So
Love that.
yeah,
Love that.
curiosity and
Resonates a
storytelling
lot. Mali,
or
what
stories.
is it for you? Let's hear.
For me, well, I have a boring and a fun one. The boring one is it's adaptable, right? Like you're not forcing someone into like this is how you need to learn, but it adapts to like how people learn themselves. And the second one is like it gives you joy, right? It has to spark some sort of joy at some point of like what you're learning or what you're doing or what it is communicating.
Nice, nice. Those are so powerful. Curiosity, joy, stories, and yeah. I hope, and as we start talking about the HCD mindset and what we can pick up, maybe we'll learn some of the ways in which to build learning experiences like that. But right now, I want to pass it on to Sanjukta to give us a little more, information on Mare and Sharon's background. And set the context for this. Get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Shraddha. This was fun. Before I do, Parisha, I've been keeping an eye on admitting people, but I won't be able to anymore. So just requesting you to let people in. Can you hear me? Could you give me a thumbs
Yeah,
up if you heard me?
sounds
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
perfect. So when Shraddha asked me to introduce Male and Sharon, I was like, this is the most joyful thing for me. Because so much of my journey in the social impact space has evolved in their presence as my colleagues over 7 years at Dalberg previously for me. And it continues to be a space of being co-conspirators, thought partners. And so when we decided to have this session in December, Shraddha and I were talking about how December is also the time when probably you all are wrapping up the year in a reflective space, going into the holidays, and what we ended up realizing is that both these disciplines, human-centered design and learning design, they are all they are very similar and different in their own ways. There are a lot of overlaps, and so we were like, we probably won't have enough time to map what's same, what's different, what to exactly take away. And what we wanted to situate this in is a sense of inspiration, opening up perspectives, challenging probably our defaults, because both disciplines have a lot to learn from each other. And today is mostly going to be just like sitting back, taking it in, absorbing. And so, with that motivation, I wanted to introduce Male and Sharon, my dear friends, colleagues, thought partners in crime. So, starting with Sharon, director at Dalberg Design. Sharon integrates behavioral science, human centered design, and qualitative research to solve development challenges across health, employment, energy, agriculture, financial inclusion in East, West, and South Africa, as well as Southeast Asia. Previously at the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics, she helped launch Nigeria's first government-affiliated behavioral science testing unit, and she's an MSc in Health and Development from London School of Economics. That is Sharon. And over to Male. Male is a director at Dalberg Design, and she applies human-centered design, service design, and qualitative research to advance climate resilience, rural livelihoods, and financial inclusion across Latin America and Africa. She works across the America and Nairobi studios at Dalberg Design, and that strengthens the South to South design collaboration rooted in local knowledge and lived experiences. And she has also designed learning experiences, very relevant to our talk today, for city officials in US to build more welcoming communities for adults on autism spectrum. and to strengthen their informal networks, and for youth involved in gangs to create and lead their own productive projects. Male is MFA in Design for Social Innovation from School of Visual Arts, New York. Such a pleasure to welcome both of you, and over to you, Shraddha, to get us started.
Sanjukta, why don't you begin with the first question?
Sure. So my first question for both of you actually today is around the process of learning design in the context of human-centered design. So would love to hear how you think about designing learning journeys, whether it's around building capacity, skilling, or learning initiatives in the context you create. What has that process been like?
I'll invite Tamale to go first, actually.
Good. Thank you, Sharon. Okay. I think the process starts also with understanding and knowing who you are designing for. What are their needs, right? I think two examples come to mind from our day-to-day work. There's one project we had in Jordan with small and micro entrepreneurs across different sectors, and the idea was to make their business more resilient, right? Like, what are the skills that they needed to be more resilient? How could like some sort of like business incubator or like sort of curriculum could help them do that? And what we were looking like, but we did some research, and the needs of, for example, moms that were business owners were very different, especially if like they were moms in rural areas. Of course, they were still taking care of their kids, so going to a place to gather to be in a class was just not enough, even if it was near in the rural area. It also needed like a little room and someone that would stay with the kids of all the moms so that they could actually engage in the learning. So like the designing of the learning experience itself needed to consider the things that were not part of what happened in the classroom. Of course, yeah, what happened in the classroom was important, what are the types of material they need, and with the tone they wanted to be talked into, to be more receptive to what was being taught. But also the things around it needed to be different. We needed to like discover that experience of like even arriving to learning, to be able to allow them to learn in the best way possible. And then there was another project we did actually in Peru. There was like this app made for scientists to help identify mosquitoes, types of mosquitoes in breeding sites. And the idea was that it will identify mosquitoes that are vectors from like Zika and yellow fever and other diseases. But the app was not made for kids, right? Like at some point it was like, this is a great learning experience for kids in classrooms. And then the kids were like, this is the most boring app we have ever seen in the world. We're never gonna use that. And then we actually redesigned that learning experience with the kids themselves. And of course, there was things that needed to remain, like how do you put like the little lens on your phone so that when you take a picture of the mosquito, then you can identify certain things. What are the parts of the mosquito that you need to look at? But there were other things like they wanted like a little guide that was more fun throughout the app, and like they were making the mosquito their friend, even though the goal was to identify and try to eradicate those breeding sites. But it became more of an experience of like, how do we make these kids citizen scientists? So they're loading all of this data, but they're having fun in the process. And another learning from that is like, of course, a lot of this happened in the classrooms, but then kids wanted to go out to the park and their neighborhood and find these other breeding sites and like take them away, which meant their parents needed to be involved. Right? So how do you give confidence? And usually they were using their parents' phones. So how do you give confidence to the parents also to be part of this learning experience? What are the type of information they need to know in terms of security? What are like, how can they be partner in the activities that they're doing within the app? And trying to, again, bake those things in. So there was not only joy, going back to the word of joy, there was not only joy for the kids in what they were doing, but there was only also some joy in the parents and like joining their kids in this activity. And like, of course, that allowed for like better capture of the data that then was informing some like national level dashboards, whatever. but at the end of the day, the kids understood how they had the power as well to transform their communities and like work, I guess, for the health of their community themselves as well.
Yeah, just wanted to index something that really stood out to me, and before I invite Sharon, the idea of giving the learner an identity, citizen scientist, I think is such a beautiful orientation to also know how I show up in that learning experience, whether kids or adults. We play so many roles, but rarely do we see a sense of like, what is my identity in this learning environment? So thank you for that. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, my examples are slightly different, and I hope they actually give I think of capacity building and learning in that sense, or upskilling. I'm thinking about how we conduct HCD capacity building within our own teams. So a team of experts that sort of does this and has the knowledge of how to do this all the time. And then also capacity building of external partners. So people who are experts in their field, they have the technical know-how, and then we are sort of putting them in the position of being learners. And I'll give sort of some context behind both. So I think for the first one, in terms of our internal teams, is like creativity is so key to how our teams practice design, right? We've had to adapt the HCD toolkit so much, and it has had to evolve because we are doing different projects in different contexts, in different countries. And so there's no one size fits all of applying an HCD toolkit or template, right? So for example, I can share maybe a framework like ecosystem maps, right? An ecosystem map is basically a visual way of describing a system in which someone exists in. So, the people around them, the institutions, the relationships, channels of communications. And so, for example, when we're thinking about a system map, the experiences and the ecosystem of a farmer in rural Kenya looks very different from, a pregnant or expectant woman in Bihar. Those maps looks very different. We can't apply the same tool to do that. And so imagining our team is full of brilliant designers and experts who have done this, we bring them together and we say, teach us how to reimagine how we practice human-centered design. And because of that, we don't have a one set capacity building team. We have a set of experts who are doing amazing work in so many different ways. And so we teach each other during our learning. And I think just how creative that becomes is so interesting. Those sessions are really fun. Male, for example, is our mapping expert, and she took us through the session. When you see Male's maps, they're incredible. They're exceptionally detailed, they're beautiful, they're detailed, there's a lot of thought that goes into them, and they can feel quite intimidating, but the session itself was so fun. We used colors and shapes and interesting ways of learning how to code information and build our own map of things in our home and our lives. And so it's just a really interesting way to learn, that sort of bringing in creativity. And then the second example is how these are people who are experts in their field, health experts, financial experts, agricultural experts. And so our goal really goes beyond just teaching them how to practice HCD in their lives, but it's actually a process. We try and use the process of learning to provoke novelty in how they think, how they ask questions, and even see each other or the people that they serve. Because when facilitating an HCD session, it's not on us as facilitators to come up with solutions. It's on us to inspire learning and thinking with people who already know what they're doing to do so differently. And so the goal there becomes, how do you bring in curiosity, playfulness, humanity as a way to inspire experts to think differently about how they ideate, and they work with each other to create different solutions. So yeah, those are.
That's Sharon, so beautiful, and a lot of that also, resonated with me. Actually, it reminded me of why we started this community. As a bunch of professionals ourselves. We've been taking courses and structured learning experiences on how to create high quality, and then we figured that there isn't the knowledge is not out there, something to learn from. It's through amazing work of people who are doing it, the practitioners, the experts, the thought leaders, that we actually learn and evolve this field altogether. And that's why we started this community, because learning is there's nothing out there really. It's just emerging, and and knowledge really does emerge in communities and in conversations like this. So just reminded me of that as well. I have a more yeah, to just take it one step forward from here. As I'm hearing you talk, every field has its own method and approach that shapes what we focus on when creating, products, and in this case, especially learning solutions, right? I can say, for instance, and learning is not one thing, right? Educators would focus on very different things. So educators versus instructional designers, curriculum developers. But broadly speaking, there's a lot of focus in our sector sort of on what is the learning goal, and is our content and our practice aligned to that learning goal. That's what good looks like, so there's a lot of focus on that alignment. But just from this lens, from how do you at Dalberg look at what is good learning? So yeah, so if you could describe this in context of learning product, process, or experience that you created, what does good learning design look like? And also, what specific and recurring mindsets from HCD guide the design of such products or processes? Maybe we can go with Mali now.
Sure. I guess it depends, right? I think it's something that we define for each context that we're at, right? Is good learning access, right? It's good learning collaboration. It depends, and like we constantly define that based on who we're designing for and what we're trying to achieve, right? Because good learning sometimes has nothing to do with the content itself. It has to do with like, yeah, we taught this content, but throughout the experience of like this learning module or workshop or whatever, women felt more reassured that they're capable of making a big shift, right? And this, for example, was something that happened we were with farmers in Mexico, women farmers in Mexico. And it was, of course, it was like they were like financial skills so that they could be more financially independent and could like make better decisions. But what really made what was really going to make a difference beyond those financial skills was like believing that they had the power within themselves to actually apply them. Right. And so in that case, we had to design for that. What does it mean? It means I see other women like myself that are not women from the city, that are not women in like who own like a textile factory, but are like women that work the land, women that live in rural areas that have done it, that have a similar story than me, and that are doing things that I dream about, but I never thought I maybe was able to do, right? And understanding what are the other types of like maybe support, or like when I say tone is so important. There's people that can like get really scared by many words or like, but like the expert teacher. There's like group of people that wanna like feel more comfortable learning in a circle and having like more like informal conversations. And so good learning looks on like what is the feeling that we want to instill in the learner so that they can better grasp whatever is the skill that we're trying to teach, right? And so it's a very hippie answer for all of you, and I'm so sorry. You can all ask more questions about it.
Yeah.
But I think I forgot the second part of your question, but like I think that's how we look at what is the feeling that's going to enable learning, and how
Right.
can we also design for that?
Right. No, that's powerful, Male. Maybe Sharon, if you could also answer from your experience what good learnings looks like to you, and then the second part.
Sure, yes, I'm happy to share. I think when I think of good learning design, I think about considering an experience or designing an experience that considers the multiple factors of the learner's experience. So this is from the state of mind that they'll be in before they come into your session, the dynamics between each other, the room or space that the learning will occur, the cultural or social norms that dictate engagement and how they show up in the room, seating arrangement, and especially mindsets to adapt when they're coming into the learning session. So I think it's just curating an experience that sort of factors in, not all of them, but as much as possible considers all these things when you're developing the experience for the learners. I think I want to underscore something around the mindsets to adopt. An example where we applied this, we were facilitating an ideation workshop with very high stakeholders about how to localize their approach to philanthropy. So these are very busy people. It was hard to get their schedule. They know a lot of things about the world. And so this was a meeting that was happening during the UN General Assembly Week in New York. And what was interesting to us was that we were talking about localization, but the people that we were talking about who should have been present there were doing this in a space that a lot of people cannot access, especially when we're talking about the beneficiaries of philanthropic work. We're doing this in a language that sometimes excludes people. And so for that session, we decided to underscore the mindset to adopt when we're ideating, right? So there's always the mindsets around openness, respect for others, etc. But we chose to elevate the privilege that this meeting existed in. So we named it early and loudly, not as something that was just a coincidence or a passing matter, but something that was supposed to be central to how we were going to approach that discussion and learn, right? So I think it was just a really interesting thing that you think when we're going into this session, adopt this mindset. But I think it changed the nature of the discussion we were having, and we started ideating on how we could be better and in our inclusive ways in how we engage people that need to be in this room, right? Like, how do we elevate those voices if we're not making the spaces feel welcoming or safe or easy to access? So yeah, just thinking about all these factors that influence the learning environment and how people show up.
Wow. That's so nuanced, Sharon, what you just said, and so real, just grounding it at something. Sometimes it's being brave to say something like that, and just the whole conversation changes when you're being so brave and authentic. It just changes the way people show up, what they talk about, how comfortable they feel to be able to say what's on their mind. I think that's so powerful. And for the guys who may be feeling, that some of you may be in the digital learning space. Maybe the conversation is, moving towards. So we'll keep coming back to also the digital learning experiences. But I think, the similar principles would probably apply there. I want to move towards a pain point that people in learning have. So whether it's a teacher in a classroom, it's a faculty in higher ed, it's somebody designing digital learning experiences, or L&D person creating a learning strategy for their organization. Learners are always, and I mean, I guess this, because this is a human-centered, HCD session today, I shouldn't call them learners. I mean, we are also beginning to see them as people first, and not just think of learners. But so people are always at different levels, right? Even if we look at like the specific things, technical, let's say, skills that we're trying to build, people are, always at different levels. So how, and then there is, their needs, their motivations, what engages, excites them. So, right, how do you approach designing learning experiences that work across this diversity? So, if you could talk to some of your experiences of how do you think about this diversity, but also how do you design, how do you address that. Whoever would like to go. Mali, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I can take that one. So we do something that is called personas. And personas, let's say when you have a lot of data, like how different people that you're gonna like design something for are, there are two traps. The first trap is like, I'm going to design one universal thing for everyone and it will work because it's universal, right? That doesn't happen. And then the other trap is like, oh, I'm so moved by this individual story of this person and I'm just going to design for this single human and then just leave other patterns and other people out. So what we do, we usually do some research at different levels, but we try to craft personas. And when you're crafting personas, basically a persona is a representation of a set of patterns that you have seen in a group of people, right? It goes beyond saying like, oh, learners from 30 to 40 need these, because there's so much more below that age number, right? If I take you back to the example of like the indigenous women entrepreneurs in Mexico, things that we look for them in how that were important, how it was going to influence how they learn, was their social context, right? And do they have family support? Is the place in where they're living judging them for being women entrepreneurs, or is supporting them, right? Like those two things really affect how they're going to show up in the space and their self-belief and how they're going to like show up as well, right? Then more like behavioral things, since this was around financial skills, is like, how do they think about money? What do they do with their savings? How do they think about the future? Prepare themselves for like shocks that may happen, right? Like being sick or like, I don't know, having an accident, whatever, right? Then demographics, that was more their, of course, level of literacy, like how far away were they from like a urban center, how connected they were in terms of like internet, phone, etc. And then because this was also for their businesses, it was like, what are like their business characteristics, right? And like imagine all of these things and you're just like trying together to understand what is the meaning of all of these things for a persona versus another, right? And from there we learn that these different types of personas are also different stages in what they want to go with their business, right? For some of them, they were like, oh, I'm just like starting. I'm just starting, and I'm like just starting to believe that I could do it, and I don't have anyone to support me. So what would I need in this space? I will need maybe someone I can reach out and ask questions. I maybe need someone that will like explain to me. In this case, they were indigenous women, so their first language is not necessarily Spanish, even though they're in Mexico, so they understand it, they can engage with it, but they want someone they can ask questions and like maybe access translation if it's needed. For those of them that are a little bit more closer to their aspiration in their business, they need more than just talks and examples. They need more practice. They need connections to other people. They also don't want to like think about their finances as like, I'm going to remain stable. They want to start thinking about like, how can I like invest a little bit or grow more? At the end of the day, also another thing that we learned that we had to design for is that because of how they live in society and how they relate to one another, finances didn't happen individually. That almost doesn't exist. It's a collective act that happens with the family, right? And the family can be my sisters and my mom, or it can be me and my kids. Like it doesn't necessarily have to involve a husband. So in that sense, we needed to understand how we were going to bring a little bit of that collective circle into the learning experience itself, so that they didn't become like these forgot the word in English, but it's called embudo, like this funnel that everything goes through them. Their business, all the skills, all the responsibilities, but that it could be open also for their own network to learn with them and grow with them.
Yeah, I just wanted to also, not to put you on the spot, either of you, but at any point, if you could, like, any point, just help the audience get an idea of what personas might look like. If you want to share your screen for any particular project, but to just underscore that idea you earlier mentioned, Malay, that personas, it's not one person's story or it's not a universal construct. These are behavioral aspects, the contextual nuances that give rise to the patterns and behaviors in people that further shape. It'll be lovely at any point in the next couple of minutes. And back to you, Shraddha.
Ametuma hapa kitunguni.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any one of you would like to share, like, I think that example, Male was beginning to sort of help me understand vis-a-vis entrepreneurship. One is almost like, looking at personas also in terms of, there may be certain kinds of people at different phases in their entrepreneurship that are looking for certain kinds of things and that need certain things because their problems are different. And so it's to sort of see categories emerging from there and to see whether what we are designing would resonate with those different people. Are we then saying sort of, connected to this also, my question, and you can answer both if you like, in terms of just naming the personas that emerge may help, an example may help further. But are we saying then there are different experiences for different personas? What's the design then? Yeah.
That's a really good question, right? So it doesn't mean that you need to design 4 different experiences for 4 different personas, right? But if you understand what are, like, if this is their journey, we want to get them from A to B. And like persona 1 goes like this, and persona 2 goes like this, and persona 3 goes like this. And then you think like, okay, what is the thing that's going to continue to push them farther and start to drop? So again, for example, with these women, we understood what were the things that would make them quit the program or quit thinking like, I don't know, like continuing to save, for example, or like to think about their credit life. And like, oh, it's like the terms are too difficult to understand. It's not in my language. All the help is a chatbot. There's no person that I can call. This is too far from where I am, and there's no way I can connect online. For example, since this was finances, there were things like, I have to go to the bank and I don't have shoes and I don't want them to look at me down. How do you design your service for those things, right? So you understand what are those things that need to be there for one person or the other, and you put it in the same journey, right? It doesn't mean that all the women didn't have shoes and felt like that. Maybe it was a persona that will fall into that particular situation of feeling shame, of not knowing the language, not knowing the answers, looking in a certain way. But when you design to erase that shame, it will support the others, right? And for example, for those that were more advanced, you can design for them in like connecting them to other people or giving them more advanced content. And that's their entry point in their journey, right? Like they will like go and move in that set of their journey. And the other ones that are here are gonna start moving with those other enablers that we designed on the way, and will continue to advance until they get here. And whatever was designed for the persona that was here will also serve them as well. It's like a trip, right? Think about your family trip. You're in a van, and there's always this cousin that needs to pee every 30 minutes. And there's always this other cousin that gets really dizzy. You don't go in 3 different vans, right? You have the paper back here, you know that you're gonna map some stops, you know that you're gonna pack some snacks. So it's a little bit like that, right? How do you then understand what is the thing that will keep your learners in the van, getting towards the direction you're all heading?
Love that example, Male. Just made it very visual for me, and also reminded me of this framework that we often talk about in learning called universal design for learning. It sort of gets us to really, create experiences that would work for a wide variety of people in terms of both like how we share information, but also how we think about motivation, persistence. But I think what's, coming off to me is just the amount of um care and attention being paid to really know who our audience is, who is the learner, who's the person, what their motivations are. I think sometimes we just jump right in once we have the outcomes, learning outcomes in place. We'll just start getting into content and figuring out how to make it interactive and fun. But there isn't enough thought spent on like really knowing the people who are going to finally use our products, right? Learning products. So that's really special to me. Sanjukta, I'll pass on to you and then we can, one question and then we can take on lots of questions, interesting questions coming on chat for you guys.
There is a bunch of questions, but also there's a lot of provocations happening, which is really incredible to see. I see people talking about including dignity as part of their thought process for the learner, which is incredible to see. My question to both of you, and probably I'll start with you, Sharon, is that oftentimes while designing learning journeys, we are in general quite hyper focused on behavior change. So I'm curious to know from you what and not all learning is for behavior change. So I'm curious what kind of learning actually influences behavior change in your perspective, and what's your take on this aspect of focusing on behavior change as part of learning design?
Sanjukta. Yeah, I was just gonna say learning can, also just be for joy or for learning's sake. So glad you think the same. I think on this question on behavior change, I mean, in traditional behavioral science, there's an understanding that there's different types of behaviors that occur in us and in our minds, right? So there's the behaviors that are very fast,
We are
they're
losing you.
automated,
Sorry,
they
Sharon. Can
occur
you hear
without you
us?
having to think, right? So these are like reflexes, how we walk, when we blink, how we talk. It's things we don't necessarily make conscious decisions about. Can you hear me? Oh no.
You're good
Can you
now.
hear me now?
Yeah.
Maybe
I
I
think
can
there's a
try
lag.
to.
You're good. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try and maybe switch off my camera just for a bit to get through the answer and then switch it back on. But I hope I'm clear now. So I was just saying, like in behavioral science, there's an understanding that there are two types of behaviors that happen in us. There's the fast behaviors, the ones that happen with ease, automation, things we don't think about, like walking or blinking or talking. These are things that just happen sort of very naturally and in our subconscious. And then there's behaviors that require more intention and deliberation, right? So like showing up to exercises every day, or eating healthy, or choosing which school you want your children to attend. So we'll just focus on the latter, the type of behaviors that are more intentional. I think the learning that inspires change in those types of deliberate behavior is learning that inspires us, or inspires us to be better or do better for ourselves or those we care about. But more specifically, it's learning that places value for the rewards in the future over any cost or inconvenience present time. So, for example, all of us know that exercise is good, regular exercise is good. We all know what we should and should not eat. We all know these things by virtue that we learned them since we were very young. But somehow we just don't always make healthy choices, right? But when you ask those people who, despite putting these choices off, they finally changed their behavior consistently, they've chosen inconvenient choices in the present more often than not, you'll find that they're doing so as an investment for a future payoff, right? They've been inspired to visualize their future selves or the future selves of their loved ones or others, and then they work in the present to meet that future goal, right? So this is how people invest in school fees for their children. They invest in regular health checkups. They invest in savings. The payouts are not in the present, they're always in the future. But that takes a shift in how you learn to inspire that change, right? It now becomes personal. It's not a passive action. The risks of doing something personal become very prevalent. So, but sometimes that learning happens in difficult ways. It can happen through lived experience. You can see someone close to you suffer from making poor choices, and then you are sort of triggered to do that. I do have to say that that type of learning is still difficult to do. So even if we know the risks of poor choices in the present, even if we have that knowledge, to do that in the context of scarcity and without the systemic support to enable you to action your choices, it's still very difficult to do. And so it takes away learning and behavior change from just an individual choice. Your system, your ecosystem has to enable you to do that. And also, you have to have the privilege of having your daily needs met, right? So in the scarcity of money, how are you going to make decisions about savings and investments when you can't think about how to put food on the table today? That's a very difficult thing to do, right? And that's very difficult to do even more with someone who has their needs met and has the comfort to be able to make that decision. So this becomes even harder if the system that they exist in does not offer itself to making those decisions easy. So I think, just to conclude, like, part of our role of designers is then to come up to take the role of learners, to try and learn different people's lives, understand their ecosystem, understand their enabling environment, understand the scarcity and the way that they make decisions, to be able to help work in collaboration with them to design solutions that account for all these factors. And sort of that's kind of what we do, and at least I do in my practice. It's not just understanding behavioral science for the sake of it. It's sort of, how do you overlay that with human-centered design that considers how this person thinks, what environment they live in, how able they are to access certain services, how shame sort of plays a role in their decision making, and then sort of creating and crafting together around that. So yeah, very long-winded answer, but I hope it was helpful. And sorry, my video is off.
Yeah, indeed. I think you touched upon so many aspects of the systemic influences as well, that sometimes are not always easy to kind of squarely measure how that impacts the learning journeys. I'm mindful of time. Should we take some questions that have been addressed quite individually as well?
I was gonna say I can flash some personas if everyone is interested.
I think that will
Yeah?
be really helpful. Yes, thank you.
Okay. If you give me permission to share my screen.
How do we do that?
Done.
Done? Okay. Let me see. Okay, allow, blah, blah, blah. Share. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
So this is a different project. We were trying to understand how different farmers in rural Mexico could adopt regenerative practices. And to do that, and to teach them how to do that, we needed to understand who they were, their collectives. So it's in Spanish, I'm gonna try to translate. So not all of them are the same, right? We saw that there's like one first persona, which is little in terms of like size of group, that were like the disruptive promoters. They had like little micro entrepreneurships. They were more educated. They were super open to experimentation, learning new things. So they were like ahead of the curve, literally, in adopting regenerative practices, and could be teachers themselves for the rest. Then there were like the second one, they were like more like visionary multipliers who were not necessarily the experts themselves, but like they were so keen to learn new things, and they were slightly younger within their communities, that they were the ones pushing their elders and others to try new things and becoming examples within their communities themselves. Then there were like dependent articulators, like, forgive my translation, but they were just people that were like connecting smaller producers of different ages and different levels of educations and bringing them together to spark collective action. Then like in dreamy implementers, I guess that's the name. And they were they really had big vision and really had big dreams. They just didn't know how to get there, right? So and they were still scared, so they were making decisions just for stability. And then there was the last one that was like not suspicious, but for the sake of translation, I'm gonna say like suspicious observers, or like more like people that had like low uptake for risk, less comfort, a little older, people that have been burned out of like, change your practice to this, change your practice to this, change your practice to this. And at the end of the day, had coming back like, oh no, it would be great if you don't chop the trees off, and like, come on, I'm tired of new people coming to teach me. So how do you design for all of that, right? And then I'm gonna pass fast, how they look like in the variables, for example, that I was telling you, is like, these are like, for example, variables of the organization, financial variables, or like their attitudes towards change and transition. So you see how each persona has a different level of like comfort, or like number, or like map in this spider graph, and that leads to implications of how we design for them. When, for example, their openness to new practices is here, or is here, or is here, right? Like what you need to explain to them, what you need to teach to them is different to cater to that openness. And then final thing that I'm gonna flash is a little bit of like, if we're back in the van, and this is the van where we're like with all these 5 personas towards adopting regenerative practices. This is how each of these persona experience the difficulty of getting there, right? And you can see that there are these dotted lines. And these dotted lines is like what it could be if they continue in the current stage, right? But usually it doesn't happen because they drop. So remember those observers that were more cautious was the word. They drop really early. They just drop at the moment of considering if the risk of trying something new is worth. So how do you design for that? It's just considering if taking the risk is worth. So what is the type of information you need to give? The type of proof, evidence, what do you need to tap into any social capital for them to move forward, right? And in comparison to those that were on the other side of the spectrum, that were promoting, and they were more disruptive. Look, they might drop, but they will drop in the, should I continue to use this practice? But they have walked all the journey. So how do you design for that moment in which they're at? Which is less on how they on the learning experience themselves, but then in that moment, you're just designing for the results. How do you make sure that they're successful in that transition that they're trying to make? So this is just a small example of how it could look like, depending on like what is that experience that you're like really trying to decide. It could be like learning math, it could be anything, but that's just a quick visual.
Thank you. That was actually really helpful to also see all the personas mapped and at what point. So I'm very, very cognizant of time. Shraddha, should we just continue taking a couple of questions into the post
Yeah,
chat?
I just want to, I mean, I know we block 1 hour of your time, but would love for you to stay back for a couple more minutes so we can take some questions. And just to let you know, also, these kind of events tend to bring, people interested in the same stuff together. So we often create a casual space for those of you who want to connect with each other to stay back. So the conversations can go on, but right now let's take some questions. So just about 10 more minutes for participants' questions. Yeah.
Cool. So quite a few. I'll start with Anurati's question, which is what are the biggest challenges faced in applying human-centered design for social impact programs? How do you advocate for the use of HCD to design learning experiences? Being the two directors, this is a very, very appropriate.
Yeah, I can take that. first part, it sounds like there's two questions. I think the thing that stands out, I don't know if I would say it's the biggest one, but I think the challenge for designers is seeing design solutions through to implementation, right? So you invest in all this time and research and conversation, and so going that extra mile to sort of work with our partners to execute and sort of implement the solutions that we've designed together is often a challenge we face. I think
Sharon, we are losing
recently
you. We might want to turn off
now
your camera.
we are exploring more work in the implementation space, and what we've noticed is that from when we're now exploring implements, sometimes because of being designers and loving creativity and being sort of stuck in this world, you then have to simplify a lot of what you're doing, because if you're implementing solutions at scale, you're now working with different partners, you're rolling out with government, there's all these ecosystem partners to consider. And so it also challenges us to step away from our role and norms as designers and sort of think about the most useful elements of our design functions in terms of just rolling them out. So yeah, I hope that touches a little bit. I think in the beginning it's implementation, and when we get into the implementation, there's different, you have to, it's like what Mali was saying in the beginning, you have to stop being so married to the solution and start becoming committed to why you designed the solution in the first place.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the next question is from Stephanie. Two questions again. What are the essential skills, tactics, considerations when you're working across different cultures? And what are the metrics or clues you look for to find out that a project is working?
Stephanie, Sure, you want to go ahead?
No, I was just saying, huge questions. These are huge questions.
Okay. Metrics. What are the biggest challenges? No. What was it? Say it again. Sorry, I got excited with the
Yes.
question, then I forgot it.
No worries. What are the essential skills, tactics, considerations when you're working across different cultures? I think you both have touched on it in many ways. And the second is, what are the metrics and clues you look for to find out that a project is working?
Yeah, I think to the first part, the human-centered design practice have been evolving, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm telling you all of these projects. I am not indigenous rural entrepreneur from Mexico. I am not a partner. I am, right? And that will forever be true, right? I bring some biases in the ways in which I was educated, I grew up, and then it takes a lot of like personal inner work to not let, or like to prevent those to dictate you from saying what is right or what is wrong. But again, curiosity to learn to approach everything without like judgment, and be open to learn as well from the people on the other side, like on things that could be different. For example, speed could be something that is shocking, right? In Colombia, people are like working at 8. We are like all doing 1,000 things at the same time, and then I go to other places and like they don't move at the same speed, or their like work starts at 10 a.m. And then even those little things, and then it requires a lot of flexibility from me. The same as like, I don't remember, I think it was the New York Times that did like this study of what is the silence time in between one person talking versus another person talking from different people around the world to feel awkward in silence. So if I feel awkward with silence with 1 second, but Sharon feels awkward with silence with 3 seconds, and I don't know about it, and I'm not, and I don't adapt to that, Sharon will forever think that I am interrupting her, and I will forever think that Sharon is not interested in what I'm saying. And it's like, even like seconds, I think is too much. I think it's less than that, right? So the I guess skills, tactics, and considerations, self-awareness, work a lot on your own self-awareness, work a lot in like approaching things with a little bit like journalist. Why, who, when, what, uh, before forming or like feeling too strong about your interpretation and opinions of things. And then metrics includes of how to find if a project is working. You test. So you test a lot. It depends project to project, but what we do on HCD, I think we talked a lot about the research and then framing the personas and designing for that. But then we test. We go back and say like, oh, look at this, like training for this, and try it. Oh no, this language didn't work. No, this pamphlet, it's some things that we have learned, for example, in a project implementation in Kenya is that we were designing these beautiful brochures and posters and booklets, and people were intimidated by them because it was not part of their day-to-day life, how they looked at things. So we had to go test them. So like, oh, it failed, scared people, even though they're so cute and we're so happy because we're designers, and detach ourselves from our design aesthetic perfection of what is good and actually downgrade what we consider downgrade. It's like maybe a Word doc is enough for this community, will be more effective, and being okay with that. So we would only know that if we just go and test and go and test and go and test and kill our babies and make new babies and so on and so forth.
Love that. And I promise this is the last one, but it feels like a very important one. I think Gioco Maina has asked this question that human-centered design brings diversity on board. Is there a threshold to consider, as we may not be able to meet all the needs, especially if they are divergent?
Maybe I can go. Yeah, I can take a stab. That's a good question. My gosh. Sort of a model or framework for threshold, but I think it depends on the learning topic, like the topic at hand, and where you're doing the research as well. So, for example, for us, it's really important to work as much as possible with local teams, right? Like local teams within our Dalberg design team, but also local teams, like local community researchers and community experts. And the reason for that is even while we have local teams embedded in our studios, again, Male says there's that bias you bring as someone who is educated a certain way, who works in the development space, whose audience is primarily, development sector players. And so you need that perspective from someone in the community to say, actually, this question in the discussion guide is inappropriate, or with the things that have been happening politically, you can't frame that question like that. That's the detail you go to in terms of interrogating the tools that you roll out and how you engage communities as co-creators, not just of the solution, but from the process in the very beginning. Like, are these questions seeming right? How is the synthesis session happening? Like, we include communities in our HCD process from end to end. And you're right. I think, secondly, it also depends on the topic at hand, right? If we're talking about, I don't know, gender and women's experiences in Kenya, maybe let's not use an all-male team for the research. Or if we're speaking about very sensitive health topics with women, let's just make sure the primary interviewer is probably a woman, and let's consider social norms around gender dynamics. So it really depends on the topic that you're investigating and the place that you're doing it in. But you're right, Maina, there's really no way to meet all the needs because they're especially divergent. And I'm also going to shout out Male, who's been working internally with our team to just think about ways we as designers can interrogate our own process. Like how do we practice community-centered design? And I think one thing they did really well is say that equity is a really hard thing to get to, right? So how do we just measure better ways to do our design, from how we create questions, from how we recruit, to how we do synthesis, to we'll never get it right 100%, but there's always something you could do better in your research.
I just want to add one little thing to that, and it's like I don't want you to take away from this call like you're gonna go and design Christmas trees learning experiences. You don't have to hang up everything or solve everything or do everything in one single learning experience. You can also be like, these are my 5 personas, but maybe what I'm able to do now, the thing that I'm able to gather buying for, and the thing we have budget for is only gonna serve these 3. But it's okay to name these 2 for now are left out. And maybe next year we're gonna try to include them. Or maybe it's like, no, they need a completely different thing, and that's okay too.
Thank you for engaging with the questions. I just want to also, before handing over to you, Shraddha, invite Male and Sharon to also look at how people are reacting to what's coming up. It's really, really heartening and provocative. So thank you for engaging in the chats as well. Over to you, Shraddha.
No, there's just so much food for thought. I always say, just need time to watch this whole recording. Thank God it's being recorded and it's going to be up on our YouTube channel if others want to, just take time to digest everything that's come up in this conversation. But there's so much food for thought on just, not just thinking about the learning product, but the whole journey of who will go through it, how will they discover, what are the likely cases of them, when would they drop out, just thinking sometimes not just thinking about content and interactivity and the goal, but also, do they really need this learning or do they just need a forum to ask question? Do they just need a checklist? Do they just need a culture? It's all of that. I think that came out very strongly for me. So just thank you so much, Sharon, Mare, Sanjukta, for just bringing in so much food for thought for us to completely. I think it's sort of shifting our perspective a little bit, getting out of our own heads of our role and just looking at the realities of what is and what role might we take to really make the shift that we're trying to drive. So thank you so much for this really thought-provoking conversation towards the end of the year. Lots of things for us to carry forward as we move towards the next year. I want to just also announce before everyone, I mean, thank you everyone for engaging so much and spending 14 extra minutes. But I just want to quickly take a second to sort of share what's coming up next. One, the conversation doesn't end here. Typically, we sort of process the insights that emerge out of these conversations with practitioners. So next week, we would be hosting a chat to look at like a couple of 3, 4 big insights that emerged for us and what do they mean for our practice? Do they really work? Have we tried something like this? Has it worked? Has it not? So this is a meetup for practitioners to share their ideas on, what's their experience with HCD bin. So do join us on Wednesday if you want to continue this conversation. But we do these events once every month, and next month we'd be looking hardcore at some of the cognitive science principles. So what are we learning from cognitive science about the biggest illusions there are about learning design? So Carl Hendrick, along with 2 other cognitive scientists, have written a book that released last month, and we're going to talk about the science of learning and how learning isn't always intuitive, and what are some of the really common illusions that we need to rethink about and change the way we create learning experiences. We are also organizing a masterclass on AI for learning design. So what does an AI enabled workflow looks like as for learning professionals? We're going to share our experiences from actually using these AI tools and prompts and in our workflow, and to share some of the best things that we've learned in our journey as learning professionals ourselves. So that's what's coming up next Thank you so much, everybody, once again for joining. Any last words, anything you want to say, or maybe we can just unmute and say bye, love, whatever. All
I
of
want to
us.
say, when is the next session? That's all. No answer needed.
The next one is next Wednesday, but we are staying back for those of you who just want to connect with others in the session, say hi, hello. There are people from everywhere, all parts of the world. If you want to stay back for just a chat, casual chat, do stay back for this networking connection bit for 15 minutes.
Thank you so much for the invite, everyone. It was really nice to see the chat and have this conversation. If you have any questions, you can direct it to Sharon, to me, to Sanjukta. Let's stay connected. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank